All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack that constant, honestly kind of dizzying media whiplash we keep seeing around China's chipmaking capabilities. You know the drill. Every few weeks, a new headline drops. Maybe it's about a secret prototype in Shenzhen or a homegrown lithography machine suddenly entering mass production. Instantly, it creates this massive wave of reactions. But as we're going to explore today, the real truth about advanced semiconductor manufacturing is way more complex. And frankly, it's a lot more fascinating than what the headlines are telling us. What's really interesting is how both sides of this media reaction fundamentally misunderstand the reality of making semiconductors. Seriously, on one hand, you've got the alarmist in Western policy circles who see a mere prototype and think, well, that's a done deal, fait accompli. And then on the other side, you've got the triumphalist in Chinese media looking at a shipped machine and calling it a totally solved problem. Both of these extreme reactions are making the exact same mistake. They treat chip manufacturing like it's a simple knowledge problem. You know, like a math equation, where once you find the answer, you just copy and paste it forever. But spoiler alert, it absolutely doesn't work that way. Now, before we go completely debunking the hype, we really do need to acknowledge the unambiguous direction of travel here. The reality is, genuine progress is happening. We can't just dismiss it because ignoring that is its own kind of massive error. With enormous state backing, China is making real, deliberate progress climbing this highly technical ladder, and they are definitely going to keep moving up the stack. Let's look at the specifics of that progress. Credible accounts show they are already mass-producing domestic immersion DUV tools. That's the most advanced class of machines they can get their hands on right now. They're targeting 28-nanometer manufacturing, but by using a super complex technique called multi-patterning, these tools are believed to be capable of hitting 7-nanometer and, hey, maybe even 5-nanometer nodes. Huawei's stated ambition is to produce over 1 million high-end AI chips just this year. Plus, as Reuters reported, there's even a domestic EUV machine at the prototype stage. So look, those triumphalist headlines, they aren't totally fabricated. A country that couldn't even build these tools a decade ago is now shipping early units. That is a genuine achievement. But, and this is a big but, those headlines are radically incomplete. There is a massive, practically invisible chasm between making a prototype and running an actual profitable business. To understand this, we need to look at what we call the four walls behind the wall. We're talking yield, materials, generational lag, and servicing dependency. Let's break these down one by one. First up is the yield wall. What does yield actually mean in this context? Well, it's reported that SMIC, which is China's leading semiconductor foundry, can technically make 5-nanometer chips. Awesome, right? Except, reportedly, they do so at only about a 20% yield. Now contrast that 20% with the 90% yield you'd see at a leading Western fab using state-of-the-art EUV technology. Suddenly, the true challenge becomes brilliantly clear. Think about the crazy economics of that difference. Throwing away 4 out of every 5 dies you manufacture? That is not a scalable commercial business. That is a science experiment that just occasionally works. Closing that yield gap isn't about finding one clever little fix. It's about making 10,000 small, agonizing fixes, each one learned by constantly running wafers and studying exactly what went wrong. The second wall is materials. You see, even the most perfect machine on Earth needs ultra-pure inputs. Right now, China still relies on Japan for roughly 90% of its high-end photoresist. In case you aren't familiar, that's a highly specialized, light-sensitive chemical that essentially acts as the photographic film for chipmaking. Japanese firms have spent literally decades building the extreme purity capability required for this, and China just cannot match it yet. So, as the saying goes, they might be able to build the camera, but they still can't make the film. They remain deeply dependent on the exact same suppliers they're desperately trying to route around. Then we hit the third wall, the generational lag. When you look at sober assessments, they place China's domestic DUV tools roughly 4 generations behind ASML. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the tools the Dutch company was releasing 15 years ago. Because of this massive lag, credible, independent forecasts project that China's domestically made tools won't reach viable sub-10-nanometer commercial production until around 2030. Notice the word commercial there. We are not talking about a prototype making a few chips in a tightly controlled lab. We're talking about reliable commercial production. That is the only metric that actually matters in this industry. And that brings us to the fourth and final wall, servicing. Let's say you have the machines. Great. But remember that multi-patterning technique we mentioned earlier? Running that at high utilization is absolutely brutal on a machine's internal optics. They drift out of calibration constantly and require continuous, highly expert servicing. The 200-plus advanced DUV tools already installed in China? Yeah, they are not self-maintaining. Keeping them running still relies heavily on experts from ASML and its partners in the West. So the crucial point here is that right now, this installed base is essentially a borrowed capability. It's not an owned one, at least for as long as that maintenance chain runs straight through the West. Okay, so this brings us to a really powerful analogy that ties all this together. Closing this gap, it is not a foot race. In a foot race, the gap is just physical distance. You can close it quickly with a sudden burst of speed or a massive influx of cash. Advanced chip manufacturing does not work like that at all. It's a phase transition. Think of water turning into steam. You can't just make it happen by moving faster, right? Water has to accumulate enough heat, slowly, until it reaches the exact temperature physics dictates, and then it crosses over. The capability to manufacture advanced chips doesn't arrive the second you get a blueprint, or even when you build the machine. It arrives when you have run the process long enough, fixed enough failures, and slowly, painstakingly accumulated enough state. Economists actually have a specific term for this exact type of accumulation. They call it learning by doing. This is accumulated, tacit, mostly undocumented institutional memory. You only gain it by running a process at scale over years, fixing failures one by one. ASML didn't become the titan it is today by just reading a manual. They built this knowledge over decades through intimate, daily collaboration with top-tier partners like TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. China is now trying to build this exact same knowledge base, but largely in isolation.
Now, the Chinese state is totally resolved to succeed, pouring just incredible amounts of capital into this effort. But money has its limits. Like the quote says, you can buy machines, you cannot buy the 15 years of operating experience that makes the machines actually produce yield. Capital can absolutely shorten some steps, for sure, but it literally cannot teleport a fab past the years of hands-on, trial-and-error operating experience required to cross that phase transition. You just have to live through the failures to learn how to prevent them.
So, how should we process the constant stream of news coming out about all this? Well, when you're reading the headlines, I highly recommend you mentally sort the claims into two distinct columns: demonstration and business. Almost all media dangerously collapses a mere demonstration into a viable business. If a prototype produced light or a tool made a few chips, that goes strictly in the demonstration column. The business column requires large-scale commercial production, sustained 90% plus yields, reliable uptime, and years of continuous operation. The actual, real-world difficulty lives entirely in the massive gap between those two columns. Going forward, here is a framework you can apply so you don't get caught up in the hype. Use these 3 steps as your filter. Step 1. Look past the immediate emotional market lurch that happens the day a headline drops. Step 2. Check if the core claim is about a prototype or if it's about actual sustained commercial yield. Step 3. Watch for the sober signals. For instance, right now, domestic machines in China are shipping in tiny volumes. We're talking maybe 5 units this year, 20 next year. That's real progress, yes, but it's a rounding error compared to what a single leading fab installs. And note that even Chinese media often pushes back on inflated yield claims. That's a huge tell because local industry insiders know exactly how stubborn this knowledge gap really is. They know you cannot skip the learning by doing phase. So I'll leave you with this final thought for the next time a breaking headline about a new chip-making breakthrough pops up on your feed. Stop, take a breath, and ask yourself, did a machine merely function, or did true, profitable, large-scale commercial production actually begin? The wall China is climbing is very real, and they are climbing it with incredible resolve, but it is much, much taller than either the fear or the triumph will admit. Keep this lens handy, and you'll be able to see right through the hype to understand the actual state of play. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.